Hello, how are we doing? Excellent, very good. I am thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to be talking about the topic of how to make our communication memorable. So today is all about specific tips and tricks that you can use so that you can help yourself remember what you're trying to say and to help your audience remember. While I like communicating, I love hearing you communicate as well. So today is going to be participative, and I invite you to participate as much or as little as you like. So let's go ahead and get started. And you'll see by some of the imagery that I'm using, I'm trying to keep a very serious subject playful. So when I ask my students or the people I coach, what worries you the most? What concerns you the most? I hear two things all the time. I'm afraid I'm not going to remember what I need to say. Followed immediately by, I'm afraid my audience is going to remember what I say. So today is all about trying to give those tools that we can use to make sure that our communication is memorable. And we'll start by looking at how we can help ourselves remember our content. And then we'll move forward and we'll talk about how to make sure that your content is memorable. And we'll start by talking about presentation hygiene. To me, presentation hygiene is about what you do to prepare for your communication. Not the actual practice, which we will talk about, but specifically what you do in your life to get yourself ready. So to begin, one of the most important things we can do is make sure that we eat well. I coached an individual who kept getting promoted in his organization, and he noticed that as he got promoted, he got more nervous and more forgetful when he gave presentations and ran meetings. And I asked him, why do you think that is? And he had no idea. And I said, walk me through your day. And what we learned was, as he kept getting promoted, his diet got worse and worse. He was drinking more caffeine, he was eating more fast food, and he couldn't remember well. So by looking into some nutritional advice, by eating more healthy, he actually regained his confidence and his memory. So preparing for a presentation or an important meeting like you would prepare for some kind of athletic event is exactly what you should do. Make sure that you treat your diet well and that you focus on elements like what you eat and when you eat certain foods to make sure you're prepared. Quick bit of advice, caffeine while preparing your communication, but not before you deliver your communication. In addition to eating, we also have to make sure that we exercise. We have to make sure that our body is warmed up, and it works very well to reduce stress that we have. So instead of spending a whole night cramming for that big meeting or that big presentation, it's far better to do a little exercise, to breathe deeply, and get a good night's sleep. Sleep is critical to memory formation and to making sure you have the energy you need to communicate effectively. So simple hygiene, what you eat, the exercise you do, the sleep you get, can really help. Now, we live in a valley of technology. So part of our hygiene and preparation needs to focus on technology. There are a myriad of apps and tools that you can use to help yourself become a better, more effective communicator. I'm going to list several here. These are tools that range from helping you reduce the number of disfluencies you have, those are the ums, uhs, likes, and I means, all the way through tools that help you with your vocal intensity and your flow. One of these tools actually allows you to don VR goggles and see an imaginary audience. An audience you can determine if it's friendly or hostile, big or small. You can even see your slide deck behind you in a virtual world. Leverage tools to help you with your preparation. This is the first step to being an effective, memorable communicator. Next, we actually have to think about the messages that we communicate. And I believe all effective communication, all high-stakes communication, must start with a goal. And to me, a goal has three key components. It's about information, emotion, and action. At the end of your meeting, at the end of your presentation, at the end of your email, what do you want your audience to know? How do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do? You should be able to articulate your goal clearly before you create your content. My goal for us today is simple. I'd like for each and every one of you to leave here with some tools and tactics you can use to be more memorable. I want you to feel confident and, dare I say, excited to try these tools. And ultimately, I'd love for you to use them. Each of you needs to think about what is your goal for your upcoming high-stakes communication. And by the way, having a goal not only helps you focus what you say, it also helps you assess the success of your communication. In the work I do with my students here and the consulting I do around the world, I often ask people, how do you know if your communication was successful? And the most frequent answer I get is, I got through it. Survival becomes the success criterion, and that's not where we want to be. If you have a goal, you can actually assess, were you successful? Do the people know what I wanted them to know? Are they feeling the way I want them to feel? And ultimately, are they doing what I wanted? So having a goal helps you not only hone your message, it helps you assess its success. So once we have that goal, we then need to think about how do we best communicate our message. And I am a huge proponent of structure. Structure is critical to success in communication. Structure helps us in two ways. First, it helps us to set our audience's expectations. And second, it helps our audience to remember. I learned this first rule very early in my life. When I was an undergraduate here at Stanford, I was a tour guide. They trained me for 12 weeks, a full academic quarter, to be a tour guide. To this day, I can still walk backwards in a straight line. What do you think was the most important thing they taught us during that full quarter in terms of being a good tour guide here? What do you think? Shout out some of the things. Smile. What else? Make people feel welcome. What else? Project. Be nice. The best thing, listen, the best and most important thing they said to be a good tour guide is never lose your tour group. You are a bad tour guide if you lose your tour group. And here on campus, they were afraid if people get lost, they might get hurt. The same thing is true in your communication. Never lose your audience, because once you lose them, it's very hard to get them back. They go to their phones, they go to their friends, they go to sleep. We need to keep them with us. Setting expectations helps. Would you join me on my tour if I showed up and I said, hi, I'm Matt, let's go? A couple of you adventurous folks would come, but the rest of you would be like, no way, where are we going? Why are we going there? Do I have the right shoes on? That's why tour guides always set expectations. That structure helps prepare you so you can be present and enjoy the tour. Structure in your communication does the same thing. But structure also helps with memory for you and for your audience. It provides a map, and you can't be lost if you have a map. So allow me to share with you 3 of my favorite structures that once you have your goal, you place your content into. The first structure is a comparison, contrast, conclusion structure. You list things in common, you list things that are different, and then you identify your particular conclusion. Another structure that works very well is the problem, solution, benefit structure. You start by talking about what the problem is. You then talk about how you solve it, and ultimately you end with the benefits to the person listening. Now, sometimes the problem isn't really a problem, it's really an opportunity. So this could become the opportunity, solution, benefit structure as well. Now, finally, my most favorite structure, and I'm the kind of guy that has a favorite structure, is the what, so what, now what structure. In this structure, you start by defining what it is you're talking about, a product, a process, an idea. You then talk about why it's important to the people you're talking to. That's the so what. And then the now what are the next steps. What can somebody do with that information? I like this structure so much because it not only helps with presenting, but it's a great way to set up a meeting agenda. It's a good way to structure an email. You can even give feedback and answer questions in this structure. I encourage each and every one of you to try putting your communication into this structure. Now I'm smiling and I'm going to take a time out. This is a meta moment for us. I just used what, so what, now what to explain what, so what, now what. I told you what it was, why it was important, and how you can use it. Take these structures or any structure you find beneficial and leverage it to make your communication memorable for you and your audience. We start with a goal, and then we put it in a structure. All right, enough of me talking. We're going to put this all together. I'm going to ask you to find a partner in one moment, and I'm going to ask you to do something with one of these structures. So to begin, how many of you remember what this device is up here? It's a slinky, a children's toy, whose sole purpose, I think, is to walk downstairs. Except in my house, it never worked. You are going to sell a slinky to your partner, and then your partner will sell the very same slinky back to you, using the problem-solution-benefit structure. Identify a problem, explain the solution, and explain the benefit. Now, one caveat. This cannot be a children's toy. You have to make it up to be something else. I never ask my students to do something I'm not willing to do, so allow me to demonstrate. Have you all heard of a terrible plight affecting the African savanna? Day after day, week after week, elephants are dying. Why, you ask? Because their trunks are getting cold. Allow me to introduce you to an expandable elephant trunk warmer. With these cheap, very effective supplies and tools, you can reduce the deaths of elephants on the African savanna. Each of us must do our part. Problem, solution, benefit. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to find a partner. For some of you, it's just turn to the person next to you. A few of you might need to move around the room. You have 1 minute each to sell your device to your partner. Ready? Begin. So I'm very curious. What did this device become for some of you? Raise your hand, I'll call on you. What was this?
This is a cup holder.
A cup holder. What was it back there?
For electric cords. You would put your cords in one section, you can stretch it around the room, and then...
Oh, it's a cozy for electric cords. Yes, sir, please.
An egg timer.
An egg timer. Oh, the egg sort of rolls down. Yes, please.
Peaceful way to trap gophers.
A politically correct way to trap gophers. Yes, sir.
Or making exercise. You can
Oh, it's an exercise tool. One, in the back.
bagel slices.
A bagel slicer, multiple bagel slicer. Excellent. I don't know what you and your partner came up with, but in looking out at you, you were having a lot of fun. The pantomiming was fantastic. Let me ask you this, though, in all seriousness. Was the structure helpful in your creating your pitch? I see several of you nodding your heads. In what ways did the structure help you? What did it do for you? It helps you focus on the problem. What else does it do for you? It helps you remember where to go from one to the next. What else? The sequence. It helps you finish. In a lot of the teaching and coaching I do, people tell me, Matt, I don't have a problem communicating. I have a problem stopping communicating. So the structure actually gives you a place to finish. After I say the benefits, I'm done. It also helps you move from one place to the next. It has built-in transition, so the flow is easier. So structure helps with memory, but it has a lot of other added benefits. So once we've taken care of our personal hygiene, and we then think about our goal and our structure, the next thing we have to do to help with our own memory is practice. So I'd like to give you some advice and guidance on practicing. First, when you practice, actually stand and speak. If you're in a meeting or you're preparing for a presentation, stand up and practice. I know how most people practice. We open up our slide deck that we've created. we sit and we look at each slide and we think to ourselves, that's what I'll say, that's what I'll say. I don't know about you, but in my mind, I'm amazingly eloquent. But when I open up my mouth, I'm not always as lucky. So it's useful and practical to actually stand and speak. And standing helps you focus. When I teach my class here on effective virtual communication, that's where you're doing webinar or video conference, I encourage all of my students to stand. Adjust the camera and stand. It helps you focus. It allows you to use your voice fully and completely. It is a very useful tool. Beyond standing to practice, we need to make sure we warm up. Most speakers, especially those who are nervous, go inside themselves and they think and they think and they worry, and we don't warm up our voice. So our first utterances aren't necessarily our strongest. I believe warming up is critical. So I'm going to ask you to help me do the world's quickest and easiest vocal warm-up. We are simply going to say 2 words a few times each. And those 2 words are teacup followed by hiccup. So I'm going to ask you to say each word 3 times in a pair. So it's going to be teacup, hiccup, teacup, hiccup, teacup, hiccup. And we're all going to say it out loud. And I want you to notice where in your mouth those 2 words get produced. With me, ready, begin. Teacup, hiccup, teacup, hiccup, teacup, hiccup. We have a couple extra credit. Yes, yes, yes. I know we're here at Stanford Business School. Everybody does the extra. When you say teacup, where in your mouth does that come from? Front, top. When you say hiccup, where does that come from? Back, lower. You've warmed up your whole voice. Very simple. Now, I'm not saying you get up in front of your very important meeting and say, 1 moment, please, teacup, hiccup, teacup, hiccup. You do this before you enter the room. I like to go around and talk to people in my audiences. In my meetings, I like to make sure I get there early and talk to people as they come in. That's my way of warming up. Make sure you're warmed up. For those of you who do athletics or who exercise, you know warming up is important. The same is true with your communication. So we practice standing up, we warm up our voice. Now, when we practice, there's some really good research in learning theory and cognitive neuroscience that tells us chunking your information is very useful. Take pieces of it and practice each piece separately, and then assemble it in different ways. So if you're giving a big presentation, perhaps you practice the beginning, then the middle, then the end, and then the next time you do the middle, the end, the beginning. That form of chunking helps you to remember each part, and it helps you avoid being in a particular pattern. Memorization actually works against you when you are in a high-stress situation. Because if you deviate from the script, you're lost. So if you are very familiar with what you're talking about, and practicing in a chunked manner helps you do that. It also helps you give attention to the end. Most people, because we're so nervous about how we're going to start, practice the beginning a lot more than the rest. So we figure, oh, by the time I get to the end, I'll know how to finish. Do you know the most common way meetings and presentations end in the corporate world? I guess we're out of time and somebody needs the room, thanks. That is not the most effective way to end a presentation. So you must practice each part and each part individually. Very helpful. Now, research done not very far from here in the psychology department several decades ago on the Stanford campus, they did a tremendous amount of work on how where you actually learn something influences and impacts how you recall it. So if you practice in a situation that is similar to the situation in which you will communicate, you are more likely to remember the information. So any of you who are parents who have instructed your children when they're studying for a test or a quiz to study in a quiet place, you're actually doing them a service. You're helping them. My children like to study with lots of noise and devices, yet when they take their exams or have to write their essays, it's in silence. That's actually causing a problem in terms of their memory. So if possible, go into the venue that you'll be presenting in, practice in there, that will help you. So there's some very specific things we can do to help prepare. But what happens if we go blank? What happens if we forget? This is the #1 fear people report to me. So let me give you some advice on how to handle blanking out. First, don't acknowledge it. oh man, I just forgot. Instead, leverage 2 techniques I'd like to suggest. First, repeat what you just said and see if that gets you back on track. When you lose your keys, how do you find them? You retrace your steps. Do the same in your presentations. For some reason, when we're presenting or running meetings and we blank out, all we do is think about all the things we need to do or say in the future. I only have 10 more minutes left. This is really important. I have to get the funding. I have to get this. That's all future thinking. You would never do that if you lost your keys. If you lose your keys, you don't stand there and say, I have to get to the store. I have to pick up the... We don't talk about the future. We say, where did I put those keys? We go back. Repeat what you just said. Most of us can remember what we said, even if we can't remember what we intend to say. And simply by repeating yourself, it often will get you back on track. Now, if that doesn't work, let me give you a second tool. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret when I teach. And I have some former students here, so you're going to hear something you heard when you were a student of mine. Have a back pocket question at the ready. So if you forget, simply pause and ask your audience a question, thereby giving yourself time to collect your thoughts, check your notes, get back on track. Here's what I do in my lectures when I can't remember what I need to say next. I'll simply pause and say, this is a good place for us to take a pause, and I'd like for you to reflect on something that we've just discussed and how it applies to you and your life. And you know what my students do? They pause and reflect on how their life has changed based on this information. And what am I doing? I'm thinking, what's next? Where do I go? I check my notes. Now, if I'm really lost, I'll say, turn to your partner next to you and tell them the impact that has. And my students think, wow, Matt really cares. And I do, but I'm also finding my place. I want each of you to think about, for the types of communication you do, what are some questions you could ask midway through, or perhaps towards the end, or even at the beginning, that would engage your audience in reflection and distract them from paying attention to the fact that you don't know where you are, so you can find out. There are lots of types of questions that you can ask. Have them at the ready. Simply by knowing that you can repeat yourself, go back to go forward, or that you have a back pocket question, makes most people feel more comfortable and confident when they present, which therefore makes them more able to get through their presentation and less likely to forget what they want to say. So the next time you fear blanking out, know you have tools to get you through it. So we've talked about what we can do to help ourselves remember. We've talked about hygiene. That's what we eat, we exercise, we sleep, we leverage technology. We've talked about how we prepare by having a goal, know, feel, do, and then creating a structure. And then we've talked about ways to practice. We stand up, we chunk information, we practice in the real environment. I'd like now to flip the coin, and I'd like to talk about what we can do to help our audience remember. And this involves 3 things too. It involves using variation. It involves making sure our content is relevant. And finally, how can we leverage emotion to make ideas stick? So let's start. We're going to talk about variation. And we're going to talk about variety in several ways. First, we're going to talk about variation in your voice. Evolution has designed humans to pay attention to variety, to novelty. If something stays the same, we habituate. If I were to have talked like this for my entire lecture, you would no longer be paying attention and likely be asleep. Variety is what keeps us focused. So you must put variation in your voice. How do you do that? Well, record yourself and listen. Do you have variation? If you notice that you don't have variety, use emotive words. When we invoke emotive words, we tend to reflect their meaning. So I might say, this is a really big challenge. I wouldn't say this is a really big challenge. The words really and big invite that kind of vocal emphasis. When you are practicing, make sure that you extend and exaggerate the way you would normally say something. When we get nervous, we tense up, and our vocal cords are muscles, and they tense up too. So if my normal vocal range is here and I get nervous, it becomes here. So when I practice, I purposely practice in an exaggerated way, knowing that when I get nervous, it will come back to my normal range. Be mindful of your voice and the variation in it. We must also use variation. Well, before we get to the next point, we also have to practice. I would like all of you to notice this word up here. What is the word? O. We're going to say O in a variety of ways to make sure that we have variation in our voice. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to say O as if a heavy object dropped on your foot. You might say a naughty word after you say the word O, but I want us all to practice. Okay, on the count of 3, something heavy dropped on your foot. I want you to say O. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh! Oh, that was great. Now, you just saw something so adorable and cute. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh. Now, you've just made a terrible mistake, and you're really sorry. How would you say oh? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh. Look what you just did. You were able to take a very simple word, and you were able to convey different meaning by varying your voice. Imagine what you could do in complex sentences and in an entire presentation or meeting. Variety in your voice is what makes it engaging. We also need to think about variety in the evidence and support that we use when we communicate. There are lots of things we can do to encourage people to believe what we're saying, to motivate them to change, to educate them. One type of evidence we can use is data. We use lots and lots of data in our lives. When you use data, make sure you provide context so that people understand what it means. But data is but one type of evidence you could use. Another type of evidence has to do with testimonies, third-party voices, other people advocating or supporting what it is you say. And then finally, there's stories, examples, use cases. These too add value. Here's the key. You must use variety among these types. Most of us communicate using the type that we are most comfortable with, what we like. If I'm a data person, when I communicate, I use a lot of data. If I'm a storyteller, I tell lots of stories. The problem is my audience isn't all like me. So I have to cast a wide net. I have to use variety in the support I use. Maybe I give a testimony and give some data. Maybe I put both the testimony and the data in a story. This helps my audience understand and remember my points. Use variety to help you support your points. We also have to think about variety in terms of the images and visuals we use. You'll notice that many of my visuals are referring to children's play or toys, and they vary. The idea is to keep the audience engaged. If all you show people is bullet point after bullet point after bullet point, they will habituate. Remember, bullets kill. Don't kill your audience with bullet points. Use images. Now, variation is important, but so too is relevance. You must make sure that your content is meaningful and relevant to your audience. That means we have to do some reconnaissance and reflection about who's in the room, who's listening to my communication, who's reading my messages. And we must tailor our messages to their needs. While some of you will get upset to hear me say this, you need to change and adapt your communication audience by audience, time by time. Does that mean more work for you? Yes. But does it mean that the impact and the relevance your message will have will be greater? Yes, and that's why we do it. So we need to tailor our messages for our audience in several factors. One, we have to first think about their knowledge. What do they know about what we're speaking on? We don't want to come in too high level. We don't want to get too deep. We need to meet our audience where they're at. So you have to think about that. You have to do some reflection. You have to ask people who are in the audience, talk to people who have spoken to this audience before, and ask, what's their knowledge level? You must also think about their expectations. What is it they expect from you? And then choose to either conform to those expectations or perhaps deviate from them. And then finally, you need to understand, what are your audience's attitudes? Are they in favor of what you're suggesting? Are they agnostic or perhaps hesitant or resistant? And with this information, we can craft our messages and hone them to be more relevant and memorable. I want to give you an example. Let's say you are presenting to an audience that you know is a bit hesitant or resistant to what you're advocating for. That is valuable information. I might change the way I structure a message based on it. So you know that problem, solution, benefit structure we talked about? If I have a hesitant or resistant audience, it might be in my best interest to move the benefits to be the first part. Start by talking about the benefits. Imagine what it would be like if we could, or what if it was possible to. Get your audience to agree to that imagined future, and that reduces their resistance. You then say what's in the way is this particular problem, and here's how we solve it. Now, I certainly can't guarantee that all resistance and hesitation will disappear, but I can suggest that by starting with the benefits, you put yourself in a better position. So understanding your audience, their knowledge, their expectations, their attitudes, can influence and should influence the way you communicate so that your audience will receive your message better and remember it longer. It's not enough just to tailor our message. We also have to make it engaging. And I'd like to suggest some ways that we can get physical engagement as well as mental engagement. Physical engagement is to have your audience do something. You could pose a question, rhetorical or a polling question. You can show a video, provide a schematic. If you're in the virtual world, have them go to an external website, have them type something into the chat. Get your audience involved. By having them do something, they are more likely to engage with the content, which we know increases the likelihood of their remembering. But physical engagement is not enough. You also need mental engagement, and there are lots of ways to do that. I already alluded to one. Use the word imagine or what if or picture this. We know from research done 2 doors down that this engages areas of the brain associated with attention and retention. So if I can ask you to imagine or picture this in your mind, you're actually seeing it, which will help you remember it. Similarly, use analogies. Analogies connect what people know to what they don't know. This also makes it stick. I talked about structuring a presentation as like giving a tour. That's an analogy. By engaging our audience physically and mentally, they are much more likely to remember what we're saying and have a good time while you're communicating with them. Finally, we must leverage emotion. We have known for millennia that emotion is powerful and engages people and helps them remember. So we need to find ways to leverage emotion in what we say. Part of that is how we say it. Bring emotion to your messages, if it's congruent and appropriate. Show that you have passion. Show that you have interest. A wonderful technique that comes from the world of theater and acting. If you are trying to convey something that you want to be exciting for your audience, think about a time you were excited right before you deliver that message. By getting yourself into that physical emotion, you will deliver it more likely in that way. Now, some of you are thinking, I get it, emotion's important, but I talk about things that don't have a lot of emotion. I talk about technology or science. There's not a lot of emotion there. And you might be right. But the consequences and implications and results of that science and technology has potential emotion. If you're saving trees, saving time, saving lives, there's emotion you can tap into. Take the time to find a way to bring emotion into your communication. It will help the audience feel something and remember. So we've talked about several factors that help make your communication more memorable. We talked about hygiene, that's that preparation. We talked about structure and practice. We then talked about what you can do to help your audience in terms of variation and relevance and emotion. These are the levers that you have to pull to make your communication much more memorable. Now, I want to see how memorable what we just did together is for you. So I'm going to ask you to think about one thing of value that you learned today in our time together. And I want you to turn to a different partner, somebody perhaps who you didn't work with last time. And I want you to explain that thing of value using the what, so what, now what structure. So you're going to tell your partner what the idea or tool or tactic is. You're going to tell them why you think that is important, and you're going to then tell them how you will use it. And then your partner will do the same for you. I want to know what you're carrying out of here that will help your communication be more memorable. So find another partner, pick one thing of value, share that value in the what, so what, now what. We often don't spend time reflecting on how we communicate. We are so fixated on just getting it done and moving on that we don't take time. The only way to get better at your communication is through three things: repetition, reflection, and feedback. You need to give yourself the reps. You need to give yourself opportunities to communicate and try new ways, try new structures, try varying your voice, try new ways of practice. Second, you must reflect and think about what worked and what didn't work. What's that definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results? We do that all the time in our communication. We need to think about what worked and what didn't. I challenge all of you who lead teams and other people, at the end of your meetings or presentations, take 30 seconds and debrief what worked and what didn't work in terms of the communication. Not the content, but how we actually communicated. That sends a very powerful message to your teams that communication matters. And then finally, we need feedback. Find trusted others, friends, family, coworkers who can give you honest feedback. Use digital recording as a tool to give yourself feedback. That's how we get better. There are also tools and resources available to you, and I encourage you to take advantage of them. Here you see a website that I curate called No Freaking Speaking. And this is a website that has lots of free content from me and from others you could take advantage of. Stanford Continuing Studies is a hidden gem that this campus provides. If you live in the local community, look at the classes they offer. There are a tremendous number of business and communication classes. They also have many virtual offerings. For those of you visiting us from far away, you can take webinar-based classes from Continuing Studies. And then finally, Toastmasters, an international organization designed to help people feel more comfortable and confident when they communicate. Take time to find avenues to learn and practice these skills. It is my hope that you are leaving here today with some specific tactics and techniques you can use to help you be more memorable and your messages to be more memorable when you communicate. Before I take your questions and I invite those questions, I have two questions for you. Did you learn something today that you think can help you in your communication?
Yes.
Excellent. Did you have a little bit of fun?
Yes.
Then I have done my job. Now I would like to hear what questions you have of me. There's some microphones in the back. People will get them to you. They're coming. We'll have here and then a set over there. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was terrific.
Thanks.
Who is the greatest speaker in your mind that's ever lived?
That is an incredibly hard question.
Oh, just what first comes to your mind.
Right.
Are you going to ask me a question because you went blank?
No. I'm not. I have been so moved in the last year by the teenagers who suffered that great tragedy in Florida.
Oh, yeah.
The shooting, which was just absolutely horrific. Those young people are among some of the most eloquent speakers I have heard. And they're not coached. They're not trained. And in fact, they have actively not sought that out. They've rejected those who want to help. So when I look at people who have had an impact, people whose messages are memorable, people who deploy some of the techniques we've talked about, I look to those teens. And to me, that is so moving. Thank you for that question. Yeah. Please, over here.
I was going to, you mentioned about talking to an audience that's hostile, but what about an audience that just doesn't relate to you at all? Sometimes I have to talk to a group of students of color and trying to figure out exactly how to say something that they open their minds to hear. And the second question that may be related is, what's the role of humor?
Right. So let me take the second question first. Humor is a wonderful way to engage your audience, if you're funny. Having a shared laugh is a great way to bring people together. It engages them. The problem is, humor is tricky. It's not always funny. It's culturally sensitive. You have to be careful. Here are my 2 rules for humor. Focus group your jokes. If you intend to use some humor, talk to people who are like people who will be in the audience and ask them, is this funny? And most importantly, listen to what they tell you. Second, use humor about yourself. Self-deprecating humor is the safest. Even though it might be tempting to talk about politics or geo issues, stay focused on yourself. It's much safer. Now, how do you relate to an audience? That can be hard. A lot of it has to do with the work you do up front. Try to understand what motivates them. What are the issues? Who are the speakers they listen to or look for? What helps connect? And then engage in dialogue. So it's not always about you talking. Get them to speak. So some of the best ways to engage an audience that you feel is going to be disconnected from you is to ask questions, have them talk to each other, become a facilitator rather than a presenter or teacher. And that's a way to build camaraderie, build trust, and to break down some of those barriers. Microphones over here. Yes, please.
Thank you. Those thoughts are applicable to different cultures. I mean, that structure is applicable for almost everyone.
I believe that much of what we've talked about today is very relevant cross-culturally. Clearly, there are some things you have to think about in terms of expectations, norms, etc., to factor into your communication. But I do believe having a clear goal, having a structure will help. Figuring out how to engage your audience will help. Now, that engagement might differ by culture, but having engagement is critical. So yes, I believe at the highest level, everything we've talked about today spans culture. How that gets deployed and what that looks like, we'll have to take the culture and context into account for sure. We've got some questions here and a microphone is coming.
So great for presentations.
Yes.
But oftentimes we are at our age coaching people. So how do you take that into a 2-minute synopsis of how you can use your skills? Because I've seen conversations kind of explode and you can't even control it.
Right.
So yeah, so just whatever thoughts you have.
So I believe with practice, you can get very effective at quickly coming up with a goal for the interaction you're about to have, and then use a structure. In coaching situations where you're giving feedback, I think the what, so what, now what structure is wonderful. What becomes the issue or the behavior that you want to address? So what is why it is important, and the now what is the guidance that you believe the person should undertake. So having that structure can keep it tight, keep it focused, and make it memorable. But it takes practice to be comfortable doing that in a spontaneous way. So you have to practice doing that type of feedback several times before it becomes natural. But I do believe coming up with a goal and structuring it can be very, very helpful for feedback as well as answering questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, the most important takeaway for me is that before communication, preparation is so important. But preparation needs time, and usually there's not enough time. And you also suggest us to have a good sleep, and So
Right.
how can we, trade off between?
I
good
wish I
rest
had
and-
the secret to how we could all get more time in our lives. What I suggest is the more you practice this, the more efficient you become at it. So you can do things more quickly. It also has to do with prioritization. Many of us think, well, I'm not going to sleep tonight because I'm going to drill this big presentation I have to give. In fact, the research suggests getting a good night's sleep is far better for you than repetitive practice while tired. So part of it is prioritizing based on what you know will be helpful. And then the other part is just becoming more efficient at it. The more effective and efficient you are, the quicker you can do it. But it is a trade-off. You have to have that initial investment. I have a very simple heuristic I use. If I have a big presentation coming up or meeting, whatever that date is, I take the time between today and that date and I cut it in half. And that first half is preparation and that second half is practice. Most of us sacrifice the practice piece. We're working on our content up until the last minute because we think, because I've worked on it, I'm going to be able to deliver it well. And every one of you who has ever done that knows that's not true. So I just use that simple heuristic. And after you do that for a while, it becomes easier. It becomes easier. Yes, please.
I have a comment and a question for you.
Okay.
The first one is, when I was in the Army, I learned the Army way of communicating, which is tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. And you followed that almost to the letter.
Well, thank you.
The question
Yes.
is, do you ever use the Gettysburg Address as an example of persuasive communication?
So I use the Gettysburg Address in my classes in a different way. There is, and I'm not remembering who did this, but somebody took the Gettysburg Address and created a PowerPoint for it. The whole speech, there's 7 slides. And I use it to prove a point, that message is important, slides are less important. There's a bar chart, 4 right? And I mean, it's very funny, but it proves a point. And you can all go search Gettysburg Address as a PowerPoint, and you will see the 7 slides. So I use it, but I use it not as a persuasive tool, although it is a very effective tool. I use it to prove the point that we need to have our story and message first, and then create slides. If we rely too heavily on slides, we lose a lot. And that makes that point very, very well. Other questions? Yes.
I have a class that I have to give in Galway in Ireland of executive MBA students.
Yes.
And they're a wonderful, wonderful group, but you know what the Irish are like. And occasionally
The Irish are very friendly, yes.
They are. They're fantastic, especially after the class is over in the pub. Excellent.
That's right.
But occasionally I have a student or two that will start looking at their mobile phone during my piece, which
Yes.
I suppose is partly a criticism of me, but the others don't, so it isn't a total criticism.
Right.
How do you handle individuals, or do you just ignore them, who appear to be distracted by something else?
So I always make the assumption that when people are doing something distracting, like looking at their phone, that there is an important reason that they're doing so. So I start from a place of compassion, rather than, it would just hurt my ego too much to be thinking that I'm boring. But what I try to do is I try to engage. Non-verbally, if you're standing up, you can move closer to the people who are distracted. And we've all learned that as the voice gets louder, we should pay attention. Try to bring them in. Asking questions works well. What I have learned in the digital age that I teach in, and all my students have, not just one, but multiple devices, sometimes you can actually enlist the devices in what you do. So you can ask people, go search on this, or there are tools that allow you to take polls through texting. So people text a certain number, and that's a poll, and you can actually show the data live. So rather than fight the technology, see if there are ways that you can leverage it to help you accomplish your goal. And that will make you feel better, and it'll actually lead to some very interesting interactions. Thank you. Yes, please. Oh, you don't have a mic. A mic is coming.
Do you ever take into account the company's culture when you're giving? For example, the founder of Trader Joe's, Joe Colomb, said that in all his messaging, he always wanted to have fun with the customer. As you give these presentations, do you take into account kind of what drives the company and have that in your messaging?
Absolutely. So I try to practice what I preach. So when I go in and do some consulting with companies all around the world, I spend time trying to understand the culture and the values, and I watch some of the senior leaders to see what they do, and then I infuse that in the advice that I give them. And that can be really important. It could also get me in trouble. I went to one startup not too far from here, and the executive team had a tradition of cursing in their presentations. And so we had some interesting examples in the workshop I led. But understanding what they do and how they do it is very important, for sure. Yes, please, a microphone is coming your way.
Thank you. So
Yes.
it was great. I used my mobile for sharing the slides
Yes.
to the group.
Oh, thank you.
So it was a good reason.
Thank you. I have to tell you, this taking pictures of slides is new, and I never know where to stand. I always feel like I'm photobombing my materials, and so I'm getting used to it. But yes, Nicholas.
I can show you later. You're going to love your pictures.
Excellent. My
you look
agent
great.
will be happy. Yes, thank you.
You look great. And now I'm blanking.
Ask me a question. No.
I know, but I'm blanking on asking the questions, I mean. So I think it was about what do you do with interrupts? So sometimes you're presenting and you get asked questions.
What do you mean?
Yeah, how do you handle...
Samir is a joker.
Yes.
And a perfect interrupter.
So what do
He's
you
great.
do? What do you do when something interrupts your flow? So if you can ignore it, ignore it. If it's somebody's cell phone going off or something of that nature, ignore it. If it's somebody interrupting with a question or some kind of comment, what I recommend you do is you use paraphrasing to take something from what they're saying and then redirect. So if somebody's saying, but what about this, you could say, that's an important point. I'm really interested in, and notice what I've just done. I acknowledged, and then I move away. I've signaled I'm done with you, non-verbally. Here's the challenge. When you are in a situation where you were under some kind of interrupt or somebody's challenging you, you have to balance being appropriate versus being rude to the individual, but also to the rest of the group. If somebody is being distracting and interrupting and disrupting, the rest of the room is feeling that tension. And very rarely will the rest of the room help you. They're looking for you to deal with it. And if you don't, then your credibility is affected. So you have to understand that you need to manage that and manage it as politely as you can. And I firmly believe that paraphrasing, taking something of value, and then redirecting is the way to handle that. I'm going to take one more question to stay on time, but I will stay afterwards and ask individual questions. Is there a final question? Right over here. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is, how do you change track in a conversation, or rather engaging conversation, especially when your counterparty is having this intense and a quite tight logic connecting statements? Is like one question after another. But meanwhile, you're well aware the conversation is just going downward against your goal.
Or not going where you want it to, right.
Yeah.
So how do you re-guide the conversation? And again, I don't mean to sound repetitive, but I really think paraphrasing is a very polite tool for doing that. So acknowledge that you hear what the person is saying. Oh, I understand what you're saying, or I hear where that's going. I'm curious to know how. So use it as a bridge. So the paraphrase acknowledges, and then bridge to the direction that you wish to go. I believe paraphrasing, when paired with structure and having a goal, are the three essential ingredients to effective communication. Those are the bottom line tools. If you can create goals, structure your messages, and know how to paraphrase the content, it can really help. I would like simply to conclude by saying thank you. Each of us has important ideas and stories and messages to convey. We must take the time to make sure that they are memorable for us so we can communicate them clearly, and memorable for our audience so they can take them with them. With that, I hope you are taking away some memorable ideas to help you be a more effective communicator. Thank you very much.